I asked him if he had anything particular in mind. He said he thought it would be a good idea for me to tell more of my story within the context of the current series topic, which, if you aren't aware of it, is dating, mating, and relating. What a topic to have a wide open range of possibilities to be preaching from. And I confess to you that I've really struggled with the topic, telling more of my story because it's just my life. But my life has been a really good example of what not to do and what to do in dating, mating, and relating. So I will be offering it to you in hopes that you might learn from my experience, not have to have another one of those learning experiences, and that you would learn from the resulting advice. And because Rand hasn't really gotten to dating yet, and because I know there are a lot of single and unattached people in our congregation, and because I actually have spent more time in my life as a single person than as a married person, I thought I'd focus primarily on the dating to mating phase. So what I'm going to do is tell you my story of dating, which includes what not to do, and the beginning of mating, and then I'll spell out some lessons learned along the way. I should also mention that I did looking at dating. I am the daughter of divorce. My parents divorced when I was about 8 years old. And like daughters of divorce, I was very hungry for love. I fell in love at the age of 16 with a boy, he was 19, who loved me back. And I made my first wrong decision. We actually got involved in a way that you're only supposed to get involved when you're married. Unfortunately, it ended after 4 months, and I was really, really heartbroken. I felt like damaged goods, very definitely. Even though, you know, I had decided to do this and all that, it just was devastating to me. But it was 1972. And for those of you who weren't here then, that was an era of what they called free love. And what that really was an era of free sex. Open relationships was the big thing. In other words, you weren't really expected to be monogamous or to just be with one person, or even, I mean, let alone just date one person. The other stuff too, you weren't expected to be faithful to anyone. Waiting till you were married was looked at as old-fashioned at best, and to be frank, having sex became part of dating. Now, I hear that that's not changed very much since then. So the reason I'm telling you this is just for those of you who are still single and unattached, to let you know I know whereof I speak, okay? So I'll give you an example of what was kind of the motto of the day. It was Fritz Perl's Gestalt prayer, and this is how it went. I do my thing, and you do your thing. I was not put in this world to live up to your expectations, and you were not put in this world to live up to mine. I am I, and you are you. And if we find each other, it's beautiful. And if we don't, it's sad. That was it, okay? Meanwhile, popular radio was giving songs like, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. There we go. There even was a song by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young that was called Why Can't We Go On as Three? So I, in my very first, yeah, you get that, yeah. Yes. So my very first class in my first term at Michigan State, I had a class that extolled all these views. I also had fallen in with some friends who were older than me who also extolled those views, and so I adopted them as the smart or enlightened practices of relationships. I didn't have a model. I didn't have a dad around who I could have learned what it should have been, and so I threw myself into that kind of a lifestyle. This also was the beginning of the era of dating liberation, shall we say. In other words, women could and should take the initiative in starting a dating relationship. So I did that. So for those of you women and men who have picked up the phone to ask someone out on a date for the first time, I know the anxiety. I've done it, unfortunately. So I became, frankly, what you'd accurately call promiscuous, and believing that having sex was just something you did when you were attracted to someone and they were attracted to you. The problem was that I wanted a relationship that was not open, that was committed, that was moving towards marriage. But as the daughter of divorce, I was willing to get involved with and remain attached to young men who started a dating process with me but weren't interested in pursuing a long-term relationship. And because I was a liberated woman, I initiated continued contact with these young men far beyond what I should have, hoping that they would see that I was the one if we just spent more time together. You see, bonding together in the sexual way creates bonds between people. It's a physiological reality. And so anytime those relationships where we liked each other ended, I was heartbroken. So I was in and out of these kinds of relationships for the better part of 28 years. I was a very slow learner. Good at school, slow learner. I should also mention that when I was about 30, I did marry a really nice man who was, I can't speak highly enough of him. I loved him and he loved me, but we both knew the morning of the marriage, we found out later, that neither of us really wanted to go through with it that day. We didn't talk about it till afterwards, but we both felt that. And the problem was everybody was in from out of town, and we really didn't want our parents to think less of us. And so we both entered it partially and with an eye to the door. It only lasted 16 months. And when it was over, I went back to my old ways. I should tell you, too, that at this time, I was a churchgoer. I was one of those people who, it's been said, sometimes the church evangelizes far too lightly. I was one of those people who heard, if you believe Jesus is the Son of God and that his Father raised him from the dead, you are born again. Great. Unconditional love. Don't have to do anything to earn it except that. I'm good. So I didn't change my lifestyle. I did listen to Christian radio a lot, and I started to hear people living this lifestyle, waking up in the morning to Christian radio. I started to hear about marriages and good marriages and people who actually loved each other and enjoyed each other and went through thick and thin together. I heard great preaching from people like Chuck Swindoll. I listened to Focus on the Family before they got really political. And I realized that I wanted to get closer to God. But there was yet another problem with that, in addition to the other one. I was an alcoholic. And I knew that as long as I depended on alcohol to take care of whatever emotions I was feeling, from happy to very sad and heartbroken, I was never going to be able to get close to God. So I went into AA at the age of 36, and I got sober. And to tell you the truth, I found there what I had always longed to find in going to church and in going to Sunday school. People were talking about what was going on in their lives, the good, the bad, and the ugly. They were also talking about what they saw God doing in their lives as they went through these things. And as I say, I got sober. I think I was successful and didn't relapse because God honored the fact that I wanted to be closer to him, and that was why I was there. And he took away the compulsion to drink. I also realized the first day that the 12 steps were really Jesus's program for living. If you look at it and you try to follow them, you think, yeah, this is all in the Bible. And so I think with that as well, my heart was just really elated that I had found a place where I could be a person of faith and could also be getting sober and learning to live much better. The final thing that I saw there that I need to mention is that I saw men in particular actually taking responsibility for the mess they'd made of their lives and doing things like telling their wives, I'm very sorry that I did this. I will not do this again. That was important for me to see because, again, I didn't have that knowledge. I had seen dad leaves. I had seen young men not taking responsibility for their decisions while I took a lot of responsibility for mine. And so over time, I began to think, you know, marriage might actually be a possible thing. Not just marriage, but a happy marriage might actually be a good thing for me. So for a time, I quit going to church because I was getting what I'd wanted from going to church there in AA. And I kept listening to my preachers on the radio. But I began to miss worshiping God, so I started going to church again, and I actually began to fall in love with Jesus. Once the alcoholic fog lifted, and based it on what I was seeing at AA in the church, I realized that I needed to change my approach to dating and only date Christian men, because I couldn't imagine being married to a non-believer, and that I needed to become, if you will, a recycled virgin. I think I said that clearly enough. So, in my own inimitable way, I put a personal ad in the Seattle Weekly, since I didn't know any Christian men. Got a few calls, dated one fellow for about 6 weeks, maintained my new status, went out with another one, and we became friends. And then that was pretty much the end of that. And that was when I decided, from then on, I was done putting it out there, so to speak. From then on, Christian men were going to have to call me, and they'd have to want to date me in order for me to pay attention to them. So I went through a dry spell, no surprise there. And when I turned 39 and was foreseeing 40 down the road, the thought occurred to me that maybe I was never going to get married. I didn't like the idea very much, but based on my track record, it was beginning to look that way to me. So I decided that I would start living my life as if I was never going to get married. And I started thinking about what that would mean. Very shortly after that, I experienced my first earthquake in Seattle, where I was living, which was very distressing to me. And I realized that all of the people who I had been close to in Seattle no longer lived in Seattle. So the question arose, what am I doing in Seattle? So shortly after that, because I also did not want to go through any more earthquakes, thank you very much, I decided to move to a small college town in Michigan where a close friend of mine and her husband lived. Now, I had spent a fairly significant amount of time in that town and had really enjoyed it whenever I'd been there, but I hadn't moved there previously because there weren't a lot of work opportunities and because of the limited social opportunities that I believed I would find there. So I had my own consulting practice. I worked with companies on helping them do planned change, helping supervisors do their jobs better, and so forth. And that meant that I could work anywhere as long as I was willing to travel. So I started looking for a place to live in this little town and found a position and a home in the Big Rapids, Michigan old jail. It was a historical site, and they needed a caretaker who was on site all the time. So I packed all of my stuff into a 24-foot Ryder truck. I hitched my car to the back of the truck, and I drove from Seattle to Big Rapids to start my new life in the old jail. Now, while I was preparing to move, I knew that I would join the Big Rapids Bicycle Club because that was how I was going to make new friends. And because I really loved to ride my bike. Well, the second full day that I was in Big Rapids, I went to a breakfast of the Big Rapids Bicycle Club, and I met this man there who was called Bicycle Bill. Well, to be honest with you, I flirted with him a little bit, very little bit, and he absolutely did not respond. Nothing. I mean, zip. About a month later, at a bike club meeting, I flirted with him a little bit again. And once again, nothing, zero, zip, nada. But about a month after that, I found myself on a bicycle ride where, to make a long story short, I ended up between a fast group of guys riding bikes and a slow group of women riding bikes. And I thought, well, this is okay. I'm riding at a good clip, and I'm keeping up with those guys even though I'm not caught up to them. I'll just follow them where they're going. Well, I went around a curve, and I went around another curve, and I went around another curve, and they were nowhere to be seen. I was pretty tired already. I looked for any sign of where they were. I decided a little wood chip in the gravel was pointing that way, so I would go that way. And that way led me up a winding hill and up in rural Michigan. There are no houses around. It's getting a little bit dusky. I'm becoming very low on water. And I think to myself, you know, somebody could come by in a pickup truck, run me off the road, throw me in the back of the truck, and no one would ever know because I was so new. But I kept riding until I got to the top of the hill where there was this mini church. And I thought, well, okay. So I looked over the crest of the hill and saw another big, long hill that I knew I would never want to come back up. So I figured I just have to make my way back to where we came from to let everybody know that I'm okay, I got lost, I did it, but it's all right. So I rode back, got to the place, no one was there. Well, at first I was angry out of being afraid. But then I decided that I would go ahead. I really wanted to be in the bike club, so I would go ahead and I would go meet them at the restaurant where they all gathered together after going for bike rides. So I went, and people asked where I was, and I explained that I had gotten lost, and they were asking things like, well, how did you get lost? Like, how did you do that? And I said, well, you know, I'm kind of new in town. And finally, someone apologized, and that someone was this Bicycle Bill. So to make a long story short there, I had gotten his attention, he had gotten mine, and as we were walking out of that restaurant together, he said to me, well, if you'd ever like to talk about Seattle, which was where he had spent some time, give me a call. And for the very first time in my life, I took a very deep breath and I said, well, I don't call men, so if you'd like to get together, you can give me a call, you know, at the old jail. He said, oh, okay, and we said goodnight. Well, I realized that the old jail phone wasn't the best phone to call me on because I didn't answer it at night. So I did have my own line in the old jail for my business. So the next day, it just so happened that we had a business meeting of the Bicycle Club. So I gave him my business card and explained that this would be a better number to get in touch with me at. He immediately turned from me, walked over to the secretary of the Big Rapids Bicycle Club, and handed the card to him, saying, this is a better number for Robin. The secretary, a wonderful old man who was about 15 years older than either of us at the time, said, Bill, that's actually for you to use. He said, oh, okay, I watched this happen. So the next day, he called me. He called me about a ridiculous bike club prize that I had won, and I thought, yeah, right. And he, in fact, did ask me if I'd like to get together that evening or the next. Now, remember, I'm not interested in having any more guy friends, but I am available to be dated. So I took a deep breath, and for the very first time in my life, I said, do you mean like a date? There was a pause, and then this is the word he told me to use, stammered. Yes, I was thinking we could go out to dinner. And so we had cleared that hurdle. This was definitely a date. If he had said no, I would have told him that I already had lots of male friends and I didn't really need any more, and I appreciated the invitation, but I really wasn't interested in doing that. That's how sick I was of what had gone on previously in my life. So I made him wait for a day. It was Friday when he called. I figured, well, I don't want to look too available, so I made him wait until Saturday. And that way I could clean my apartment and get a new top to wear and so forth. So the appointed time came. He got to the old jail. And as I was gathering my things to go, he said, well, I was thinking we could either go to Grand Rapids, which was an hour south by highway, or we could stay here in Big Rapids and have dinner, whichever would make you feel safe. And my heart went, oh, what a nice guy. He's actually thinking about what I might want to do and how I might feel about it. So we decided that we would stay there. We went to the restaurant. We began talking. I learned that he had been in seminary, and I explained that I was a Christian. And he said that he was too, but that he still had questions. And I figured, well, as long as he's got questions, it's okay, because he's still in the game, right? So we had a wonderful evening. We talked for an hour before we ended up even ordering. And we saw each other at bike club events and so forth after that, and we became an item. Now, I'd like to tell you that at that point, I kept my word to myself about remaining a recycled virgin. However, I would be lying to you. I don't remember how soon, but it was soon, that we got involved sexually. And we were in love. We were pretty much inseparable. We had a few spats, but nothing really serious. At some point, he actually asked me, how could I be a Christian and have sex before marriage? And I mumbled something about being a pretty weird question for him to be asking me, since I was actually involved with him. But that didn't stop me or him. What did stop us was we decided to go to a new church. And at that church, I heard a sermon based on 2 Peter chapter 1. In which Peter lets his readers know that they have been given everything that they need to live the life that they are called to live as a Christian. And that if you didn't know that, you were forgetting that at your baptism, you had been made perfectly acceptable to Christ. It was as though floodlights went on in my head. I realized for the first time that I had never in my life made a commitment to follow Jesus. I mean, you all figured that out, but I hadn't figured that out. But that I had never made a commitment to follow him because I never thought that I could please him enough or be obedient enough. And now I was hearing that I had what I needed. So he wasn't a scary God anymore. He wasn't setting me up to fail. The second thing that I knew in an instant was that I had to change my relationship with my boyfriend, Bicycle Bill. That scared me. To be honest with you, I thought he's going to break up with me, because I'm changing the rules right here in this very moment here. So after the service was over, we went out for our usual piece of pumpkin pie and coffee. And as usual, I asked him, so, what did you think? And he said, I think we need to clean up our relationship. And I said, me too. I was so relieved and so happy, and it was such a God thing that we both came to the same place. So time went on, and a couple months after that, I was doing dishes, and he said to me, Robin, I need to let you know something. And I said, what? And he said, I'm not a Christian. And I said, what do you mean you're not a Christian? You go to church with me, you go to the classes, you're doing all this stuff. What do you mean you're not a Christian? He said, no, I have questions, and I don't really consider myself a Christian. And so, again, for the first time in my life, I again took a deep breath, and I said, well, I need to let you know that I can hang with that for a little while, but if you're serious about that and it's really where you're landing, then you and I are not going to be able to continue, because I cannot imagine marrying someone who is not a Christian. So he said something like, okay, I understand that. And at the next moment, the doorbell rang, my sister came over, so we were saved from having to go through any more about that. But what I did, which was also different, was I let it sit. I didn't try to convince him. I didn't try to turn him into a Christian. I just prayed to God that he would grab him by the heart and have him come to Christ, or that he would give me the strength to break off the relationship. Bill got appendicitis a couple of weeks later. He would have died if he hadn't gotten to the hospital when he did. Every single person who took care of him there was from the church. The surgeon was a Christian and let him know. The nurse went to our church and was a Christian. The phlebotomist went to the church and was a Christian. The respiratory therapist went to our church and was a Christian. And when the pastor came to visit him in the hospital, at the end of a conversation, he said to Bill, "Would you like me to pray for you?" And Bill said, "Yeah." So he did pray for him. I was watching going, hey, that's a good sign. So a couple of weeks after that was when he became born again during a sermon on Revelation and what would happen to people who didn't believe. For those of you who think hellfire and brimstone sermons don't work, they worked on Bicycle Bill. So at that point, he became a Christian. The next Sunday after that, they extended an invitation to everybody to attend a pre-marriage class at the church. And it was for people who were going to get married, were engaged, or people who were maybe thinking about getting engaged. So after church, we went out for coffee and pumpkin pie. And Bill said to me, "I was thinking maybe we should take that pre-marriage class. What do you think?" I said, "Is this like a proposal?" He said, "Excuse me for a minute, I have to go to the restroom," which he did. Now, the way that he describes it is, he looked in the mirror, the room started spinning. He took a deep breath, he saw stars, he grabbed onto the wash basin and said, "What have I done?" But he then goes on to say that he came to his senses and he walked back out and he sat down and he said, "Yes, that was a marriage proposal." So I said, "I'm really glad to hear that, and yes, I would love to marry you." We never did go to that class. So a couple of months after that, or so, let me think. Yeah, it took 2 more months, and it ended up that we needed to go through a marital mentoring class. That is a class that we took, and we passed that. We could have not passed it. The pastor literally would have refused to marry us if he didn't think that we were going to be able to make it. So we ended up getting married. Did we live happily ever after? Yes and no. Yes, because we are still together, and that's Bicycle Bill right there, in case you hadn't figured that out. No, because we've been through some very difficult times. Sometimes it even required couples or even individual therapy. But I can tell you this, I've been married as a Christian and I've been married as a non-Christian. And I don't know how non-Christian people make it through. If I had not given my commitment to Bill and to God that this was going to be a lifelong marriage, I think I would have been gone at different times. I didn't entertain actually leaving, but it was so hard. But by staying faithful to each other and faithful to God, we have been able to weather it. And I can tell you in all honesty, we are the happiest that we've ever been in our marriage. And I just thank God for that. So, what are the lessons that I learned along the way? The first thing, you will remember if you've been here, Rand said any relationship really needs to have Christ as the foundation, and then you start putting other poles and up and a roof and all that kind of stuff. What I want to let you know, and this is for single people in particular, but all of us, your relationship with Christ needs to be the foundation of your life before he can be the foundation of your marriage or your dating or your relating. You need to cultivate that relationship first. You need to do the kinds of things you would do if you were going into a dating relationship. You need to create time to spend with him that's focused on him. You need to find out what he thinks and expects and even commands. You need to find out how he handles different situations. And you need to find out his purpose in your life and your place in that. You need to make a decision to honor and love and obey him, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, first, above anyone else, yourself included. Matthew 10:37, Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves a boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse more than him is not worthy." So he needs to be the primary relationship in your life. How do you love him? He's very clear about that. In John 14:15, he says, "If you love me, you will obey my commandments." A little later, he says, "The person who has my commandments and obeys them, that's the one who loves me. If anyone loves me, he will obey my word. The person who does not love me does not obey my words." The relationship needs continuous cultivation as you learn to love and to obey him. And the relationship requires that you continually be looking at it anew, that you keep on spending that time. I'm going to tell you I learned that loving and obeying him is the necessary prerequisite for having a healthy self and healthy relationships. The relationship gives you an identity as a loved, even though imperfect child of God. Over time, that begins to address any love hunger that you may have that could otherwise lead you to give up your identity for someone else. Let me say that again. Over time, this primary love relationship with Christ begins to address any love hunger that might tempt you to give up your identity for this person that you might date or marry. The relationship also builds humility. God is perfect. You're not. And we learn that. But we also learn that we can be forgiven in our imperfection. And the relationship gives us the experience of seeking and receiving forgiveness when we repent of the problem behavior. Only because we understand how God has forgiven us in our imperfections can we even imagine extending forgiveness to others when they repent of their sin against us. And Jesus actually says, watch yourselves. If your brother sins, rebuke him. If he repents, forgive him. And even if he sins against you 7 times in a day and 7 times returns to you saying, I repent, you must forgive him. This gives us practice before we get involved in a marriage. And finally, because of the Holy Spirit residing in you, because you are loving and obeying Christ, you're never alone. So you never have to fear that loneliness that so many people who don't have Christ actually experience, that existential, I'm alone in the universe, hurtling through on this planet. What am I going to do? Only in and through him can you begin to take the risks and make the decisions and the boundaries that are involved in building a healthy singlehood or a healthy courtship or a healthy marriage. We Christians have different standards on dating and on being married. We know what we're not supposed to do before we get married. We know also that our marriages are to last for a lifetime. That's the commitment that we make. Now, I don't need to go into if you're being beaten and all that kind of stuff, then you need to remove yourself from that situation and address it. But the lifelong marriage is the standard that we strive to meet. And finally, the good news is that as a follower of Christ, striving to obey him and become more like him, you do really have everything you need. That 2 Peter chapter 1 verse comes back to mind. You've been given everything you need to live the life that he has called you to live. So, how do you actually do this dating and courtship thing? The first thing that I want to tell you is you need to cultivate a rich and full life as a single person. I know, you've heard that, right? That's what they all say. But I'm telling you, and I told you all that other stuff so that you would know that I know what I'm talking about. I'm not somebody who just learned that at my mother's knee and then I'm passing it on to you. I learned the hard way. You need to cultivate a rich and full life as a single person. What does that look like? You need to figure out what you want to do with your time and your attention and your energy besides getting married. You need to think about a work life and a career, a way to support yourself. You need to develop a social life that has pals and acquaintances and groups of people that you do things with. You need to develop your leisure activities, hobbies, and skill development, and fitness, and avocations. You need to develop your spiritual life, your spiritual life. How are you going to relate to Jesus from now on? What's your church life going to be? Are you going to join life groups so that you get to know groups of Christian people? And you need to figure out, how are you going to live your altruistic life? In other words, how are you going to sacrificially serve other people? Because serving other people is a form of love. It's a form of love that we are called to express in this world. The other thing you need to do is you need to pay attention to yourself, and that's a self with a capital S. You need to develop your character, who you are by yourself and with others. The Bible will give you a lot of advice on the kind of person that you need to be in order to be someone who can make good choices, but also who can be a good partner. Quick thing, you need to learn how to manage your money well before you get married. Many, many marriages end because of money issues. You want to avoid consumer debt, and if you have student loans, you need to have a plan to pay them off. Enough said about that. I encourage you to give yourself what you would get at a bridal or wedding shower. Don't wait until you get married to get yourself dishes and silverware and maybe a couch. Those kinds of things. You might not get those for wedding presents. But again, you want to be living a rich, full life. And as an adult, adults have those things. So you want to be feeling satisfied. Some of you are laughing, no, we still don't have those things. But you want to be living as an adult, having the kinds of things that you need to have a nice place to live in, for example. And finally, I want you to resolve to be happy and deeply satisfied in your life as a single person. To come to that place where you can say to yourself, you know, if I never get married, if God never has that for me, it'll be okay. That way, you can make good decisions for yourself. Now, I'm running out of time here. I have a lot more. I'm not going to get to it. But I want to give one other piece of advice. And that is, this is also for the single people, but also for the adult people, the married people. I'm sorry, that was a terrible Freudian slip. The grown-ups. Go for courtship. If somebody asks you to just get together, they can be asking you to get together for any reason, including they have nothing better to do and can't think of anybody else that they want to spend time with. Okay? So be aware of that. It's like asking a friend, a buddy, do you want to get together? With dating or going out with someone, what that means is, if somebody asks you out on that, there's an inkling that maybe someday They might want to think about marriage, maybe. So there is an element of romance potential in dating. And you shouldn't say yes if somebody asks you out, if you don't also have that inkling that maybe someday you might possibly think about them as a potential person to marry. Don't ask people out if you don't have that inkling. And I'm going to say something that I realize some of you are going to go, huh? Okay, here it is. Ladies, wait for them to ask you. Now, you can indicate that you're available to be asked, right? You definitely can indicate that by doing things like saying hello, asking questions of him about himself, listening to what he says, responding to him, getting involved in a conversation, looking like you're having fun while you're talking to him, all those kinds of things. And guys, if she wants you to ask her out, she probably will do some or all of those things, so you can know about taking the risk. But wait. I have 24 years of experience to tell you that it doesn't work the other way. And to be honest with you, any good story I've heard about how people get together and get married, I personally have not heard that she asked him out first. That's just my experience. Now, guys, I have a little word for you. Just because she smiles at you once or twice or a whole bunch of times does not mean that she wants to get involved with you. Now, we got another teach for that one. They actually did research, and they found out that a lot of young men and older men think that if a woman smiles at them, that they're interested in getting involved with them. Not so. As I mentioned, you take the risk out of it by watching. Is she doing things that are going to let you know that she does want to spend some more time with you? Then you ask them out on a date. Finally, I say go for courtship. And what's courtship? It's a process that has as its goal marriage. Now, I'm not saying, guys, don't invite her out unless you know you want to marry her. There are books that say things like that. I think that's taking it too far. And women, I'm not saying don't go out with him unless you know you want to marry him. Not saying that. But what I am saying is that you want to know that you are you want to be in a relationship with someone who you care about, who you think that you might really want to marry, and to take the time to learn who they are. So I'm going to stop now. If afterwards you have any questions, I'm here. You can ask me. But I want to go back to that first point. Your relationship with Christ needs to be the foundation of your life before he can be the foundation of your dating or mating or courting or relating. Let's pray.